The hallway breathed with darkness. 2:24 in the morning, and Alejandro Valenti stood motionless in the shadows of his Boston mansion, watching the woman he had hired slip out through the side door like she was stealing something that was not hers to take. The black cashmere coat draped across her thin shoulders, 2 stuffed canvas bags gripped tight in her hands, the same bags she carried out, never brought in. 4th time in 11 days. His jaw tightened. The faint sound of her footsteps faded toward the street, muffled by fresh snow. Alejandro did not move. 38 years old, 6'2", built like a man who had clawed his way out of the streets and never let go. Dark hair silvered at the temples, a scar running from his left eye to his jawbone, a souvenir from when he was not yet powerful enough to avoid violence. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it cost more than Sophia Hartley's annual salary. A gold watch caught what little light penetrated the hallway, the weight of it solid against his wrist like a reminder of everything he had built, everything he protected. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and right now they burned with something dangerous. The silence swallowed him whole. He had built his empire on one immutable law: trust no one. Betrayal had only one price. Only one. Tony and Nino had done their work well. The report sat on his desk upstairs. Timestamps. Locations. Patterns. Between 2 and 4 a.m. she left. Always between 2 and 4. Always with the bags. Always back before Emma woke. His daughter. 6 years old and the only person in this world he had not learned to armor his heart against. What was Sophia Hartley carrying out of his home at 3 in the morning? The possibilities cut through him like a blade. Information. Documents with the names of his associates, his operations, his vulnerabilities. Weapons. Stolen merchandise. Or something worse, something that could endanger Emma. He had given this woman access to his daughter. Access to his inner world. Sophia, with her soft voice and her careful hands, the way she had appeared on his doorstep 6 weeks ago with a recommendation from a trusted source, how quickly she had become something Emma trusted. And that, perhaps, was what terrified him most. Footsteps approached from the east wing. Measured. Unhurried. Nino emerged from the darkness, a man in his early 50s with a thick neck and eyes that missed nothing. Expensive suit, black leather shoes, a bulge beneath his jacket where he kept the .45 Glock that had been his companion for 23 years. She left again, Nino said. Not a question. I saw. This makes 4 times this month. Tony says her pattern is consistent. 2:30, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. Never later than 4:15. She is back before 6, always before Emma's alarm goes off. Nino's voice was like gravel, worn smooth by decades of conversations that began with whispers and ended with bodies. What do you want us to do? Alejandro's hand closed into a fist. The gold watch caught light again. Follow her. Find out where she goes. Find out what is in those bags. And Nino. He turned to face his lieutenant fully. The scar on his face seemed to deepen in the shadows. If she is selling information. Death, Nino finished. 1 bullet. Clean. Make it quick. I do not want Emma to hear gunshots in the night. Nino nodded and faded back into the darkness. Alejandro stood alone again. He thought of the night 6 weeks ago when Sophia had arrived, hollow-eyed, exhausted, recommended by Father Michael at St. Anthony's as a woman who needed work and could be trusted. She had mentioned needing to care for her sister. Hospital bills. Nothing specific. Just enough information to suggest desperation, which in Alejandro's experience meant compliance. Desperation made people controllable. But desperation could also make people dangerous. He climbed the marble staircase to the 2nd floor. Each step echoed. The house was silent except for the sound of winter wind pressing against the windows. He passed Emma's room, door cracked slightly, the nightlight throwing soft purple shadows across the small shape in the bed. his daughter slept with her hand curled around a stuffed rabbit that Sophia had given her, a gift Alindro had not authorized but had not forbidden. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. He did not know, as he stood in that doorway watching his sleeping child, that in less than 72 hours his entire world would collapse and rebuild itself. He did not know that the woman he had just ordered tracked and potentially executed was at that very moment sitting on the cold metal steps of a public hospital 2 miles away, tears freezing on her face as she waited for surgery reports on her sister. He did not know that Sophia Hartley was not stealing from him but trying desperately to save someone else's life. But what he also did not know was this: everything he believed about Mercy was about to be shattered and forged into something new. Alindro closed Emma's door gently and returned to his study. The room was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books he did not read, paintings he had purchased because someone told him they were valuable. A crystal glass held bourbon the color of honey. He poured 2 fingers and sat behind his desk, the report spread before him like an indictment. For dates. For documented departures. For bags. In his world, the answer was simple. Execute her. Problem solved. Emma would grieve briefly and move forward. Children were resilient. Children adapted. But as he looked at those timestamps, something in him hesitated. And in that hesitation, without knowing it, Alindro Valenti cracked open a door in his own fortress that he had sealed shut 15 years ago, the day his wife drowned in her own blood. He did not drink the bourbon. Instead, he set it aside untouched and stared at the darkness beyond his windows, waiting for dawn to come and his lieutenants to report back with the truth about Sophia Hartley. The truth, as it turned out, was something far more complicated than betrayal. And something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, at 2:48 in the morning in a Boston mansion where a Mafia boss stood deciding whether to order a woman's death, we must go backward. Back through time. Back past the night Sophia first arrived at his door. Back past the playground. Back to a frozen morning, 8 weeks earlier, where everything began not with betrayal but with mercy. 8 weeks before this hallway. 8 weeks before those canvas bags. 8 weeks before Alindro Valenti learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do is allow himself to care. A young girl stood alone on a snowy playground in South Boston. 6 years old, blonde hair in 2 braids, wearing a purple coat 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from a cousin, though no one needed to know that. Emma Valenti had never been alone at a playground before. There was always someone. A bodyguard 2 steps behind, pretending to be a parent, watching with eyes that never truly left her for a second. But today, her father had allowed something he never allowed: 1 hour. 1 hour where she could play without surveillance, with 3 other children from her private school and their mothers watching from a nearby bench. 1 hour of almost being normal. The wind bit at her cheeks. Snow crunched beneath her black winter boots, expensive boots, Italian leather, worth more than some families' entire wardrobes. She had a jump rope in her hands, bright yellow with blue handles, and she was waiting for the other girls to arrive so they could play together. That was when the boy appeared. He was older, maybe 9 or 10, with a face like a stone and eyes that burned with the particular cruelty that only children could conjure. His name was Marcus Whitfield, and he came from money, the kind that had taught him the world was his personal playground where every rule was negotiable if you had enough power. "You can't play with us," he said, not with anger but with the casual certainty of someone stating a fact. "This is our jump rope game. You're too young." Emma looked at the rope in her hands. "This is my rope." "Not anymore." What happened next was fast. Marcus reached out and yanked the jump rope from her hands. It fell to the snow. He stepped on it, grinding his boot into the bright yellow plastic, his face twisting into something that was almost a smile but colder. 3 other children gathered around him, drawn to power the way insects are drawn to light. "Please give it back," Emma said. Her voice was small. She was not supposed to cry at school. Her father had been very clear about this. Crying was weakness. Weakness got you hurt. But Marcus did not hand it back. Instead, he pushed her. Not hard, but deliberate. Emma stumbled backward into the snow, her purple coat billowing around her, and fell hard on her backside. Pain shot through her tailbone. The sky above her was grey and endless. She looked up at the children standing over her and realized that no one was coming to help. The mothers on the bench were not watching. One was on her phone. Another was texting. The third was staring into the distance. In that moment, Emma understood something about the world that should have taken her years longer to learn. Sometimes nobody sees. Sometimes nobody cares. That was when Sophia Hartley walked across the playground. She was not supposed to be there. She had ducked out of her shift at Shady Oaks Elderly Care Home on the pretense of a family emergency, a lie, though not about her family. Her sister's emergency. The same emergency that had been consuming her for 18 months. But she had gotten the call from St. Anthony's Catholic School asking if she could pick up a child. A small emergency. 10 minutes. Could she? Sophia had agreed without thinking because she had not learned yet that she was not allowed to say no to anything. She wore the uniform of a care worker, pale blue scrubs, sensible shoes, her hair pulled back so tight it gave her a headache. 27 years old but looking closer to 35. There were shadows under her eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. Her hands were thin, the fingers raw from constant washing. She had eaten approximately 47 cents worth of yesterday's leftover mashed potatoes from a patient's untouched dinner plate, and her stomach was beginning to send desperate signals to her brain. But when she saw the little girl sitting alone in the snow, she did not think about any of that. She did not think about money or hunger or the way her ex-boyfriend Douglas had called her 17 times today, each call more threatening than the last. She did not think about the $47,000 hospital bill waiting on her kitchen table or the way her landlord had served her with a notice that her rent would be doubling next month. She simply saw a child who needed help. Sophia crossed the playground quickly, her sensible shoes crunching in the frozen snow. She knelt down beside Emma, her movements careful and kind. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Emma looked up at this woman, at her tired eyes and her gentle voice, and suddenly the world shifted. Someone was asking if she was hurt. Someone had noticed. Someone had come. "I am okay," Emma whispered. "Your name?" "Emma." Sophia looked at the jump rope in the snow, at the boy standing over it with his boot still pressed against the bright yellow plastic. She stood slowly. She was not a tall woman, maybe 5'4", but something in the way she moved made her seem larger. There was a quietness in her that was stronger than noise. "That belongs to her," Sophia said to the boy. Her voice was not angry. It was simply a statement of fact. "It's our rope now," Marcus said, but he was looking at his friends now instead of at Emma, suddenly uncertain. Sophia picked up the rope. She cleaned the snow from it carefully. She handed it to Emma, and when their hands touched, she let her fingers linger for just a moment, the smallest gesture of comfort that a drowning person could offer to another drowning person. "Thank you," Emma said. "You are welcome," Sophia replied. And that was all. She did not stay to supervise or lecture or make the moment bigger than it was. She simply turned and walked back across the playground, leaving Emma standing there with her rope, suddenly surrounded again by children who had decided she was worth playing with after all. At exactly that moment, 300 yards away, Alejandro Valenti sat in the back of a black SUV watching his daughter on the playground. The vehicle was armored, the windows tinted dark as night. Tony sat in the front seat, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting near his jacket. Nino was 2 cars back with backup. This was how Alejandro protected his world, by being present everywhere, by seeing everything, by making sure that nothing and no one could ever hurt his daughter the way that woman had been hurt. His wife. Maria. She had screamed for help that did not come. He had been 14 blocks away at a business meeting, and by the time he got to the hospital, she was already gone. He watched Emma play now, and his jaw clenched with the effort of remembering that he could not always be close enough. That sometimes rescue came from strangers. That sometimes a woman in blue scrubs could walk across a frozen playground and change everything. But he did not know that yet. He did not know that Sophia Hartley had just altered the trajectory of his entire life. He only knew that his daughter was safe, and that was the only equation that mattered. Sophia, meanwhile, had turned back toward her car, a 2003 Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been glowing ominously for 3 weeks. She had no money to fix it. Soon she would have no car at all. Everything was collapsing, slowly and methodically, like a building being demolished one brick at a time. She drove back to Shady Oaks, where Mrs. Chen in room 312 was waiting for her afternoon medications, and the day stretched forward into another 14-hour shift that would pay her exactly $84. Neither of them knew that their lives had just intersected on a frozen playground. Neither of them knew that this moment, this simple act of kindness from a woman with nothing, extended to a child with everything, would eventually become the single hinge point upon which the entire universe would turn. And as the sun began to set over Boston, casting long shadows across the city, neither Alejandro nor Sophia understood that they were both about to enter the darkest period of their lives. But also, unknowingly, the most transformative. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us dive back into what happened next. The radiator clanged like a dying animal at 1:47 in the morning. Sophia Hartley sat motionless on her mattress, the only furniture in her studio apartment besides a plastic chair with a broken leg, her hand clamped over her mouth, her breath coming in shallow pools through her nose. The pounding on her door did not stop. It only grew louder. "Sophia, I know you're in there. Open up, baby. I just want to talk." Douglas Hale's voice came through the wood thick and wet with alcohol, the words sliding together like oil. "Stop being difficult. Let me in." She did not move. Her eyes, hollow from a 14-hour shift, fixed on the peeling paint near the ceiling where water damage had bloomed in the shape of a fist. The pounding continued. 1, 2, 3. Each impact shook the door frame. Douglas Hale was 28 years old, built like someone who had never worked a day in his life, with the kind of face that had always gotten what it wanted, sharp cheekbones, blue eyes that could turn vicious in a heartbeat, blonde hair styled with products that cost more than Sophia's entire monthly electric bill. He wore a cashmere sweater under his Burberry coat, and his BMW sat running in the street outside, exhaust fogging in the November cold. His father owned one of Boston's largest investment firms. His fraternity brothers were now police officers, prosecutors, judges. Douglas Hale existed in a world where consequences were something that happened to other people. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me," he called through the door. His fist struck the wood again. "We had something good, Soph. You don't just throw that away." Sophia's throat tightened. They had not had something good. What they had was 6 months of her saying no and him not listening. 6 months of her working double shifts while he showed up at her apartment demanding attention, money, time. 6 months of her saying she wanted out, and him laughing like she had told a joke. 2 weeks ago, she had changed the locks. 3 days later, he had climbed through her bathroom window and waited for her in the dark. "I called the police," she whispered to the empty room, though she knew it was a lie the moment the words left her mouth. She had called. 2 officers had arrived, Officer Martinez and Officer Broderick, who played football with Douglas on weekends. They had looked at the window damage and looked at Douglas's concerned face and looked at Sophia's work uniform still soaked with spilled coffee, and Officer Broderick had said, "Looks like a misunderstanding." He said you locked him out. That doesn't seem right, does it? Couples fight. Let's not make this something it's not. They had left after 8 minutes. The pounding stopped. Sophia held her breath. Sometimes that was worse, the silence, the not knowing if he was still out there. She waited 2 minutes. 3. 4. Then she crept to the peephole. Douglas stood in the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear, and his face had shifted into something that looked almost gentle. He was nodding, listening to whoever was on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I'm handling it," he said. "She's being unreasonable, but I'll make her see reason. She's nobody without me. She knows that. He paused. No, she doesn't have anyone. No family in the city. No money. Just the hospital bills for her sister. Yeah, I know about those. I could use that. He laughed, a sharp, bright sound that made Sophia's stomach clench like a fist. Anyway, I'm not worried. She'll fold. He hung up and looked directly at the peephole as if he could see through it into her soul. I know you're listening, Sophia, he called, his voice suddenly cheerful, suddenly kind. Tomorrow you're going to come to your senses. And when you do, you're going to wish you'd been nicer to me when you had the chance. His footsteps retreated down the hallway. The elevator dinged. Then he was gone, and the apartment fell into a silence so complete it felt like suffocation. Sophia did not sleep. She sat on her mattress with her knees drawn up to her chest, and she thought about her sister Grace in the hospital. Grace was 24 years old and had leukemia, and the chemotherapy bill for this round of treatment was $197,000. Sophia's parents were dead, her mother from an aneurysm when Sophia was 16, her father from a heart attack 2 years later. There was no one else to help Grace. There was only Sophia, working 2 jobs, 7 days a week, sending every penny that was not spent on rent and the most basic food to Massachusetts General Hospital's billing department. At 6 in the morning, Sophia showered in water that was barely warm. The building's heating system had failed 3 winters ago. She dressed in her work uniform and navy scrubs with a coffee stain near the pocket that would not wash out, and at 6:45, she counted the money in her checking account on her phone for the 3rd time that week. $78. That was everything. Rent was due in 12 days. The apartment cost $850 a month, and she was already 2 months behind. The eviction notice had arrived on Tuesday, delivered by a woman with a clipboard who looked at Sophia with something between pity and contempt. The notice was printed on bright red paper. 12 days to pay $2,200 or vacate the premises. She could not vacate the premises. She had nowhere to go. Sophia pushed the phone away and grabbed her keys, a single brass key attached to a plastic dolphin keychain that Grace had given her 8 years ago when they were still playing pretend instead of fighting for survival. The morning commute to Shady Oaks Elderly Care Home took 35 minutes on the Red Line. The train smelled like wet clothes and artificial lemon cleaner. Sophia found a seat near the window and watched her reflection stare back at her, a woman of 27 who looked decades older, with dark hair pulled into a bun so tight it gave her a headache, with eyes that had forgotten what it felt like to hope for something. There were purple shadows under those eyes. Shadows that came from working 60-hour weeks. Shadows that came from eating leftovers scraped off patient trays because she could not afford the $3 banana at the hospital cafeteria. The care home was a 4-story brick building that had once been elegant and had now settled into tired middle age, like everything else in this part of the city. Sophia clocked in at 6:58 and found her assignment on the bulletin board, patients in rooms 312 through 324, first shift, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Then she would come back at 4 p.m. for the second shift until midnight. 14 hours in the building. The pay would be $84. Room 312 was Mrs. Chen, 83 years old, with arthritis so severe she could barely lift her own spoon. Room 313 was Mr. Kowalski, recovering from a stroke, unable to speak but able to understand every word people said to him, his eyes tracking Sophia with desperate intensity as if she might be the person who could bring him back to words. Room 314 was Mrs. Henderson, 91, still sharp as a blade, still angry at the world for not dying when she was ready. Sophia worked through the morning with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She changed linens. She helped patients bathe. She listened to their stories, some of them the same stories she had heard yesterday and the day before, repeated because the dementia had swallowed the yesterday and the day before. She was gentle with them because they deserved gentleness, because they were somebody's mother or father or grandmother, and because she understood what it felt like to be invisible. To be nobody. To be a person whose struggles did not matter to anyone with power. At noon, she took her lunch break in the employee bathroom, locked the door, and ate a container of applesauce she had brought from home and 3 saltine crackers. Someone had left half a sandwich in the refrigerator in the break room, turkey and mustard on wheat bread, and Sophia did not know who it belonged to, but she ate it anyway, standing over the sink so the crumbs would fall directly into the drain. 43 minutes later, she returned to the third floor. At 2:30 in the afternoon, while Sophia was helping Mrs. Chen into clean pajamas, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message from an unknown number: "You can't ignore me forever. I own this city. You're nothing without me." She deleted it without responding and helped Mrs. Chen into bed. 372 miles away, in the downtown penthouse of a building that had once been a bank and was now called Valenti Tower, Alejandro Valenti stood at a floor-to-ceiling window and looked out over the city he had built from blood and will and strategic violence. He was 42 years old, 6 foot 2 inches tall, built like a man who had spent his life preparing for war. His hair was dark, silvering at the temples. The scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone was white against his olive skin, a permanent reminder of his father's fists, his father's rage, his father's complete incapacity to love anything he did not own. Alejandro's father had died when Alejandro was 19. A car accident on Route 1. No witnesses. The police ruled it an accident. Alejandro had cried exactly twice in the 23 years since, once when his daughter Emma was born, and once when Emma's mother, Catherine, had died from ovarian cancer at age 35. That had been 6 years ago. Now Emma was 6 years old, with her mother's soft brown eyes and her father's absolute refusal to accept injustice. She had attended Brookline Academy's kindergarten program for 3 months before she came home one day with her small hand bleeding. "What happened?" Alejandro had asked, his voice tight, controlled, the kind of voice that made grown men tremble. "A boy pushed me," Emma had said, her eyes filling with tears. "He said I was weird because my mommy died. He said nobody wants kids whose mommies die." Alejandro had held his daughter's hand under running water and felt something ancient and terrible wake up in his chest. He had called the school. The boy was Michael Richland, the son of Senator Richland, connected, untouchable. Michael had pushed Emma into a concrete bench. The school had called it playground roughhousing. Alejandro had listened to the headmaster use the word roughhousing while his daughter's hand bled, and he had understood in that moment that power did not protect his child. Money did not protect his child. A $40 million net worth and a criminal enterprise spanning 3 states did not protect his child from a 6-year-old boy whose father was important. 3 weeks ago, Emma had come home from the playground with scrapes on both knees and a story about the same boy knocking her down again. But this time, a woman in blue scrubs had been there. A woman had seen what happened and had gotten down on her knees in the dirt and helped Emma up. A woman had told the boy that what he did was not acceptable. A woman had stayed with Emma until her breathing calmed, until the tears stopped, until her courage came back. What was her name? Alejandro had asked, though he already knew. His security team had provided a full report. Sophia Hartley, age 27, employed at Shady Oaks Elderly Care Home, 3 blocks from Brookline Academy. Single. No criminal record. Annual income, $38,600. Debt, $197,000 in medical bills for her sister's cancer treatment. She didn't say her name, Emma had said. "She just helped me." She said, "Sometimes a little bit of courage is the strongest thing in the world." Alejandro had stood at this window and thought about a woman he did not know who had courage when she had nothing else. A woman with calloused hands and worn-out scrubs who had chosen to intervene in a stranger's crisis when it would have been easier, safer, smarter to walk past. His Lieutenant Tony knocked on the office door at 3 in the afternoon. Tony was 45, built like a stone wall, with a neck that seemed to move separately from his body. He had been with Alejandro since they were teenagers fighting in basement rings for money. He was the closest thing Alejandro had to a brother. "We have a problem," Tony said. His voice came out flat and careful, the way it always did when the problem was serious. "Sit," Alejandro said. Tony sat and laid out the situation like a general surveying a battlefield. The Whitfield family, old money, generational wealth, completely legitimate on the surface and completely corrupt underneath, had begun moving into territory that belonged to the Valenti family. Not drugs. Not guns. Something more damaging to the city's foundation. Financial fraud tied to housing. Predatory lending. Evictions designed to steal property from people who could not fight back. The woman running this operation is Diana Whitfield, Tony said. Age 49, widow, sits on 3 charity boards, known philanthropist. He laid out photographs. Diana Whitfield had the kind of face that looked kind at first glance and predatory on the second. She's evicting families systematically. We found 73 cases in 6 months. Working with a man named Douglas Hale. He identifies vulnerable women, usually younger, usually alone, pressures them into relationships, then coordinates with Diana to have them evicted. Diana buys the properties for pennies when they go into foreclosure. It's clean from a legal standpoint. It's vicious from a human one. Alejandro listened to the details and felt something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. He thought of Emma playing on the playground. He thought of Sophia Hartley helping a child who was not her own. He thought of his father's hands and the lessons those hands had taught him about the world's cruelty. "Give me names," he said. "Every person they've evicted. Every building they've bought. I want a complete map." Tony nodded and stood to leave. "Tony," Alejandro said. "Find out everything about Sophia Hartley. Where she lives. Where she works. Every detail." "Already done, boss." Tony laid a file on the desk. In the photograph, Sophia Hartley looked exhausted and real and impossibly brave. She's clean. Works 2 jobs. Sends her entire paycheck to the hospital. She's 3 weeks behind on rent. Alejandro opened the file and read the address and understood with absolute certainty that Sophia Hartley was about to meet the most dangerous man in Boston, and she had no idea it was coming. The playground at Revere Beach sat gray and quiet under an October sky that threatened rain. The swings moved slightly in the salt wind, creaking their lonely song. Sophia Hartley sat on a weathered bench, eating a bruised apple she had found in the break room at Shady Oaks Elderly Care Home, the apple soft in the middle, brown spots spreading across the skin like a disease, but she bit into it anyway because the apple had cost her nothing and she had $78 in her pocket and 12 days until her eviction. 28 minutes. That was all the time she had before she needed to catch the bus to her second job, the night shift at a restaurant where she cleared tables for tips that rarely came and sometimes, when the manager was not looking, ate the scraps left on plates, the half-finished chicken breast, the side of mashed potatoes that someone had abandoned, the roll with 1 bite taken from it. 28 minutes of silence before the exhaustion started again. Then she heard it. The sound of a small voice trembling. A boy's voice, older, cruel. "Give me your backpack, cry baby. I know your dad has money. He'll buy you another one." Sophia's head lifted. Near the slide, a small girl with dark curls stood frozen, her hands clutching a small red backpack to her chest. The girl was maybe 4, maybe 5. Behind her, a boy of about 9 circled like something hunting. His sneakers were expensive. His jacket was new. But his face held the particular meanness that Sophia had learned to recognize, the face of someone who had never been told no. "My papa gave it to me," the little girl whispered. "I don't want to give it." The boy shoved her. Not hard, but hard enough. The girl fell, her small palm scraping against the gravel, and Sophia was on her feet before she had finished swallowing the apple. The bench scraped against concrete as she stood. Her legs moved. Her voice came out steady. "Hey! Leave her alone." The boy turned, surprised. Boys that age never expected adults to interrupt them. They moved through the world believing themselves invisible to authority, invulnerable to consequence. Sophia walked toward them, her worn sneakers carrying her across the playground like she owned it, like she was not a 27-year-old woman who had not slept more than 4 hours in any single night for the past 2 months. "Who are you?" or the boy sneered. Her mom. "I'm someone who doesn't let bullies hurt little kids," Sophia said. Her voice did not tremble. "Get out of here before I call your parents." The boy's face darkened. For a moment Sophia wondered if she had made a mistake, if this was a child whose parents would sue her, a child protected by lawyers and wealth and the kind of cruelty that money buys. But the boy was already running, already disappearing toward the far edge of the playground where he could pretend that retreat was his choice. Sophia watched him go, then turned to the little girl. She knelt down slowly, aware that her knees hurt, aware that her legs bore the marks of 8 hours standing at Shady Oaks and the prospect of 8 more hours ahead. The girl's palm was bleeding slightly. Her eyes were wide and wet with unshed tears, tears she had not yet cried, tears still locked behind her courage. "You okay, sweetheart?" Sophia asked. The word came naturally, as if her body remembered how to speak to children even though she had none of her own, even though the child she had carried for 8 weeks 3 years ago was no longer here. The girl nodded, her chin trembling. Sophia pulled a crumpled napkin from her purse, a napkin she had taken from the break room at Shady Oaks because she sometimes used it to wipe her face before her second shift, and gently pressed it against the girl's palm. The bleeding stopped. The napkin absorbed the small amount of blood. Sophia held it there, her touch gentle in a way that her own life had not been gentle for years. "You were very brave," Sophia said. "Don't let anyone take what's yours. When someone tells you that you are small or that what matters to you doesn't matter, you remember this moment. You remember that you stood up. You remember your name and your backpack and the fact that your papa gave it to you because he loves you. Don't let anyone make you forget that." The girl stared at her, absorbing words that were too big for her age but somehow necessary. Then a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The kind of vehicle that did not belong at the Revere Beach playground, the kind that arrived like an answer to a question no one had asked. A man in an expensive suit, grey, tailored, worth more than 3 months of Sophia's rent, stepped out quickly, his eyes immediately finding the small girl. "Emma." His voice was controlled, but something underneath it suggested that his control had been tested. "Your father has been looking everywhere." He scooped up the little girl, and she immediately wrapped her arms around his neck, relaxed into the kind of safety that Sophia could hear in the way his hand supported her back. He was tall, this man. Muscular beneath the suit. There was a scar running through his left eyebrow and another one barely visible along his jawline. His eyes were dark and assessing, and for a moment, just a moment, they locked onto Sophia's. "She's fine," Sophia said. She stood, backed away slightly. "Just a little scrape." There was another child, but he ran off. The man nodded once, a movement that seemed to close the conversation, and returned to the SUV. Sophia watched him go. She had 22 minutes left before her bus arrived, and she had to get to the corner in 14. She ate the rest of her apple as she walked toward the bus stop, and she did not see the second vehicle parked 40 feet away, did not know that Alejandro Valenti had watched the entire moment through tinted windows. She did not know that he had seen her fierceness, her gentleness, the way her hands had trembled slightly as she touched his daughter's wound. She did not know that a decision had been made in that moment, a decision that would pull her entire life into the orbit of his world. 2 weeks later, Sophia's phone rang while she was on her break at Shady Oaks. She was sitting in a small room where the staff kept their things, her head resting against a metal locker, her eyes closed. The phone had cost her $12 at a pawn shop 6 months ago, and it rarely rang. "Hello," she answered, her voice uncertain. "Miss Hartley? My name is Antonio Russo. I represent a client who needs occasional evening childcare for his daughter. We understand you have experience. The pay is $400 per evening, 2 evenings per week." The voice was formal, Italian-inflected, brooking no argument. Sophia's hand went numb. $400. She did the math in her head even though her thoughts were foggy with exhaustion. That was $3,200 a month. That was enough. That was salvation. That was impossible. Why me? The question came out before she could stop it. "You come highly recommended. Are you available?" She said yes before her brain caught up to her desperation. The mansion in Beacon Hill was so far removed from Sophia's life that she had to check the address 3 times before approaching the black iron gate. The house was cream-colored, 3 stories, with marble columns and windows that reflected the evening light like a slow blink. Sophia stood outside the gate for 2 minutes, gathering courage, straightening her only clean shirt, pushing her hair behind her ears. The clothes she wore had come from donated bins at Shady Oaks, a black blouse that did not fit quite right, grey pants that were half an inch too long. Tony answered the door. He was large, suited, and his eyes narrowed when he saw her, an appraisal that Sophia felt like a temperature drop. But then a small voice shrieked from somewhere inside the house. "It's you! The nice lady from the playground!" Emma Valenti appeared at the top of a curved staircase and descended it like she was floating. She was wearing a pink dress that probably cost more than everything Sophia owned. Her dark curls were combed. Her face was absolutely radiant. She reached Sophia and threw her arms around her, and Sophia fell into an embrace with this child she did not know, holding her like she was oxygen. Over Emma's small head, Sophia saw him. Alejandro Valenti. 6'1", his build muscular and controlled beneath a black suit that cost as much as her monthly rent. Dark hair with silver at the temples. The scars she had glimpsed before were more visible now, one running through his left eyebrow down toward his cheekbone, another along his jaw that spoke of a life lived in violence. But his eyes, dark and assessing, held something else. Something that looked like recognition. "Miss Hartley," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Thank you for coming." Sophia stood, Emma's hand in hers. "Thank you for trusting me with your daughter." He nodded once, and Tony gestured her deeper into the house, past the marble floors and crystal chandeliers, past the oil paintings in gold frames and the furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Emma tugged her toward the kitchen, chattering about her day, her school, her favorite color, information that poured out of her like she had been waiting to tell this specific woman everything about her life. Over the next 4 weeks, Sophia came to the mansion twice a week, always at 6 in the evening, always leaving by 9. She read to Emma from picture books that smelled of new pages. She helped with simple homework, taught Emma to count in Spanish because a memory surfaced from somewhere, Sophia speaking to her grandmother in a language she had mostly forgotten. She made simple dinners. Pasta. Chicken. Vegetables. Nothing expensive, nothing that required her to explain herself. Emma adored her. The girl called her every day at Shady Oaks. She drew pictures of them together. She asked, "Will you stay forever?" Sophia learned to dodge that question. "We'll see, baby. We'll see." But Alejandro watched. She saw him in doorways. She felt his eyes studying her, not with suspicion yet, but with something that felt like investigation. She never asked about his business. Never snooped in rooms that were not hers. Never took anything, never took advantage of the wealth surrounding her. She came, she cared for his daughter, she left. She was a ghost, quiet, faithful, invisible. Then the late-night trips began, and everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon when Sophia left Shady Oaks at 3:20. The afternoon was grey, the parking lot nearly empty. She had just finished her first shift, and her body ached with the particular exhaustion that came from lifting elderly residents, from standing for 8 hours, from the constant low-level anxiety of counting the days until the 12th when her eviction would become final. The silver Mercedes appeared like a predator at the moment of weakness. It blocked the exit. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was 38, blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, designer coat in a color that looked like melted butter. Her face was beautiful in the way that cruelty often is, sharp, arranged, intentional. She smiled at Sophia, and the smile had no warmth in it. "You must be Sophia. Douglas has told me so much about you." The woman's voice was smooth, poisoned honey. Sophia tried to walk past. The woman shifted, blocked her path with her body. "Did you really think you could just leave him? Douglas is a catch." "You're what?" "A care home worker who smells like old people." The woman's smile widened, and it was the widening of a predator's mouth before a strike. I own your building, sweetheart. That eviction notice? My gift to you. Pay $2,200 in 12 days or you are on the street. And Douglas will be waiting. Sophia's hands went cold. She had heard of Diana Whitfield before. She knew the name from the hospital, from whispered conversations between patients, wealthy donors who gave money and received everything in return. Diana Whitfield sat on charity boards. Diana Whitfield was known as a philanthropist. Diana Whitfield was destroying Sophia's life with the same smile she probably used when cutting ribbons at foundation galas. Why are you doing this? Sophia whispered. Diana leaned close. Her perfume was expensive, suffocating. Because I can. Because watching poor girls like you squirm is the most fun I've had all month. Douglas says you're resilient though. Says you won't break easily. I do love a challenge. She stepped back, and her smile became a laugh. 12 days, Sophia. Then you have nothing. She drove away, leaving Sophia standing in the parking lot, the smell of expensive perfume hanging in the air like a curse. Sophia pulled the eviction notice from her bag. 12 days was written in red ink across the top. Red like blood. Red like a countdown. Red like the end of something. That evening, she arrived at the Valenti mansion for her regular childcare shift, and Alindro noticed immediately. He stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her, and Sophia felt the weight of his attention like a pressure against her skin. Emma was already excited, already wrapping around her legs, already talking about the book they would read together. Sophia knelt down, held Emma, breathed in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, and tried to make her smile genuine. But Alindro saw it. He saw the way her hand shook slightly as she stood. He saw the bruise on her wrist that she tried to hide by pulling her sleeve down. He saw the fear in her eyes, the particular fear of someone drowning and wondering if anyone was looking. After Emma was asleep, Sophia gathered her things. It was 8:55. Alindro was waiting by the door. Miss Hartley, he said. His voice was gentler than she expected, but something underneath it suggested that gentleness was not his natural state. Are you in some kind of trouble? Sophia's heart accelerated. She shook her head quickly. No. I'm fine. Thank you. You are not fine, he said. It was not a question. Someone has hurt you. She left before he could press further, before the gentleness in his voice could undo the careful walls she had built around her desperation. She did not see Tony and Nino exchange a look. She did not hear Alindro tell them to watch her more carefully. She did not know that her late-night trips to the homeless shelter 3 miles away, delivering donated clothes from Shady Oaks residents, blankets, canned food, her own meager purchases, were now being monitored, that Alindro's suspicion was hardening into something else entirely. She did not know that he was about to discover the truth behind those trips, and that the collision between his world and her world was accelerating toward an impact neither could predict. The black and white checkered floor of the Dorchester diner seemed to tilt beneath Sophia's feet as the door crashed open behind her, the blizzard's howl swallowing the small bell that hung above it. Wind screamed at 40 miles per hour, carrying snow so thick that the streetlights outside had dissolved into ghosts. The thermometer on the diner's exterior read 19 degrees, but the wind chill made it feel like the air itself had turned against her. Sophia stumbled forward, her torn coat offering no protection, her breath coming in gasps that fogged the plate glass window. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to be invisible, small, quiet, the kind of woman people looked past without seeing. But invisibility was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her left eye was completely swollen shut, the socket a landscape of purple and black and sickly yellow at the edges. Handprints circled her throat in perfect finger-shaped bruises, each one a signature, a confession, a crime scene written on her skin. Blood had dried on her split lip, and there was fresh blood seeping through her sleeve where the fabric had torn. She gripped the counter, and her hands shook so violently that the night cook, a man named Eddie who had worked this shift for 8 years, froze mid-motion with a coffee pot suspended in the air. He had seen a lot in this diner. He had seen drunks and addicts and people who had lost everything. But he had never seen anyone look like they had been pieced back together from the wreckage of a car accident. Sophia's knees buckled. In the back booth, in the shadows where the neon light could not quite reach, Alejandro Valenti looked up from a cup of coffee he had not touched in 20 minutes. He could not sleep. Sleep had become a luxury for men who could turn their minds off, men who did not see the faces of their enemies in the dark, men who did not carry the weight of being responsible for the survival of an empire built on violence. The blizzard had called to him at 2 in the morning, and he had driven through the sealed streets of Boston, his black Range Rover moving like a dark blade through the white chaos, because sometimes the only way to think was to move through a storm. He was 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, his Italian wool coat worth more than a year of the average American salary. His dark hair had silver at the temples now, though he was only 42. His hands were scarred, his knuckles marked by years of being a man who solved problems with force. But his eyes, his dark grey eyes, had gone absolutely still the moment he saw her. Sophia. Her name was a statement, a question, a command, all compressed into a single word. She turned, and when she saw him, something inside her simply broke. The wall she had been holding together for 3 months, the careful facade, the pretense that she was fine, that everything was manageable, that she could survive this alone, collapsed like a building imploding. Her breath came in a sound that was not quite speech. I didn't know where else. She could not finish the sentence. Alejandro rose from the booth with the controlled precision of someone trained for violence, every movement measured and deliberate. He crossed the diner in 4 strides, and Sophia flinched, an involuntary movement she could not control, a reaction hammered into her nervous system by 3 months of being afraid. But he did not touch her roughly. Instead, he caught her as she fell, his arms around her, supporting her weight with ease. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, as if she were Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, who sometimes fell asleep on his shoulder during the drive home from school. He carried Sophia to the back booth, set her down on the red vinyl seat with infinite gentleness, and slid in beside her. The diner was so quiet you could hear the freezer humming behind the counter. "Who did this to you?" Alejandro's voice was soft, absolutely devoid of the thunder that made his men move with the urgency of soldiers following orders. This was worse than anger. This was something else entirely. This was a man who had watched his own father destroy his mother, piece by piece, and had made himself a weapon to ensure that would never happen to anyone in his circle again. Sophia could not speak. Her whole body trembled, shock and pain and cold combining into a catastrophic shutdown of her nervous system. She was wearing thin gloves, worn through at the fingertips. Her shoes were waterlogged. Hypothermia was setting in, though she did not realize it yet. "Sophia. I need to see how bad this is." Alejandro's fingers moved to the hem of her shirt with absolute gentleness. She flinched but did not stop him. He lifted the fabric carefully, just enough to expose her ribs, her abdomen, the landscape of her torso. What he saw made something crack inside his chest, a sound that reverberated through his entire body. The bruises sprawled across her in layers like a geological record of abuse. Purple ones. Black ones. Yellow and green ones that had begun to fade, which meant they were weeks old. Fresh ones over ancient ones. Boot-shaped marks on her left side. Handprints on her arms and shoulders and back. Her collarbone was cracked, he could see the way she moved, the way she protected that side of her body. This was not a moment of passion. This was systematic. This was practiced. This was a man who had done this before. Alejandro pulled her shirt back down with the same care he had used to lift it. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. His hands, hands that had killed men, hands that had ordered executions, hands that had dismantled organizations and erased people from existence, his hands trembled with rage. "His name," he said. It was not a question. It was a demand that would be answered. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper, shattered like glass. "Douglas Hale." And Diana Whitfield helped him. They wanted to destroy me. They wanted me gone. The words came out in fragments, separated by sobs she could not suppress. She told him everything. 3 months of Douglas showing up at her apartment at 2 in the morning, knowing she had just gotten home from a shift at Shady Oaks, knowing she would be tired and vulnerable. The way the police had ignored her calls because Douglas had a cousin on the force, had money, had connections. Diana Whitfield buying the building she rented from and issuing an eviction notice with a 12-day deadline in red ink. She had received the notice 15 days ago. That meant 9 days remained. 9 days to find $22,000 or be homeless. She had $78 in her checking account. $78 in the entire world. Her sister's medical bills had climbed to $197,000. The surgery had been emergency neurosurgery, and the insurance company had denied the claim, calling it a pre-existing condition. So Sophia had worked double shifts, sometimes 16-hour days, eating the cold leftovers from dinner trays at the nursing home, wearing the same 3 uniforms, and still it was not enough. It would never be enough. Alindro listened without interrupting. He had mastered the skill of stillness, the ability to take in information while his mind was already 3 steps ahead, already calculating, already moving. When Sophia finished speaking, her voice reduced to a breath. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number without looking at it. Tony. His voice had returned to that soft, terrible quality. I need you and Nino at the Dorchester Diner on Dorchester Avenue. Now. Bring the car and the medical kit. And call Dr. Mocchetti. Tell her I need her at the house in 1 hour. He hung up without waiting for a response. Then he looked at Sophia, and something shifted in his expression, became even more dangerous because it became human. You are not going back to that apartment. You are not going anywhere near Douglas Hale ever again. You understand? Sophia shook her head weakly, fear and gratitude and confusion moving through her in equal measure. You don't understand. He has connections. The police won't help me. He's already destroyed. I don't need the police. Alindro's voice was final, absolute, the voice of a man accustomed to having his word treated as law. In 15 years of working for me, Tony and Nino have never seen me move like I am about to move. Douglas Hale is going to discover what it feels like when someone with actual power decides that his time is finished. Sophia wanted to protest further, wanted to explain the complications, the ways that rich men protected themselves, the ways the system had already decided she was expendable. But then Alindro knelt in front of her, dropping to one knee so their eyes were level. She saw past the dangerous exterior in that moment, saw the boy underneath who had survived his father's fists, who had clawed his way out of the North End with nothing but violence and will, who had built an empire because he was determined that no one would ever be helpless in his presence again. You protected my daughter when you had nothing to gain, he said quietly. You have worked yourself to the bone. You sneak out at night to deliver blankets and food to people the world has decided do not matter. You are not nobody, Sophia. And what they did to you ends tonight. 20 minutes later, while Tony drove Sophia carefully through the blizzard toward Alindro's estate in Cambridge, the house with the marble entrance and the heated driveway and the wine cellar worth more than most people's homes, Alindro made 3 phone calls from the diner's payphone. The first was to a federal investigator named Sarah Chen who had a personal vendetta against Diana Whitfield for a land deal gone wrong years ago. The second was to a journalist at the Boston Globe whose career was built on exposing financial corruption. The third was to a man named Vincent Carcetti who specialized in tracking digital evidence and had a particular skill for recovering deleted bank records and encrypted communications. By dawn, Douglas Hale and Diana Whitfield would have no idea that their entire world had begun to collapse. But Alindro Valenti knew. He sat in that diner, watching the snow fall, and he allowed himself something he rarely permitted. He allowed himself to imagine a world where Sophia Hartley was safe. The news report flickered across the television screen at 6:06 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. Douglas Hale woke to the sound of pounding on his apartment door, the kind of pounding that does not stop, that shakes the frame, that promises violence if ignored. He stumbled out of bed still half asleep, silk pajamas wrinkled, expensive cologne clinging to his skin like a shield. His smug smile was already forming. He thought it was Sophia. Broken. Begging. Ready to accept whatever he offered because she had nowhere else to go. He opened the door. 12 men in black tactical gear filled the hallway like a predator closing in. But these were not Alindro Valenti's men. These were Corsetti family enforcers, the most brutal organization in New England, the kind of men who made street criminals nervous. The kind of men who operated in shadows and made people disappear without explanation. Victor stepped forward. 6'3", shoulders broad as a doorframe, eyes that had witnessed things that killed the humanity inside. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw like a blade wrapped in flesh. He grabbed Douglas by the throat and lifted him one-handed, feet dangling 3 inches off the ground. "You put your hands on the wrong woman," Victor said, his voice flat as a gravestone. Douglas's face exploded into purple. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. Please, I can pay. I have 200,000 in offshore accounts." Victor smiled with no warmth, no light, nothing human behind it. "We don't want your money, Douglas. Alindro Valenti called in a favor. And you, my friend, are going to pay it." They dragged him screaming into the hallway, still in his silk pajamas, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of fear and urine. His neighbors heard. They saw. But the Corsetti name ensured silence deeper than any grave. No one called the police. No one intervened. No one would ever admit they witnessed anything. Douglas Hale was thrown into the back of a black van. The doors slammed shut. He would never return to that apartment. He would never return to Boston. What waited for him in the basement operations of Corsetti Enterprises in rural New Hampshire was a nightmare with no waking point. No trial. No lawyers. No rescue attempt possible because he would cease to exist. Douglas Hale, the man who stalked and choked and terrorized, would spend the rest of his life doing manual labor in the darkness, kept alive but wishing for death every single second, his identity erased, his name forgotten, his body broken by work that never ended. Death would have been too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. Meanwhile, at 9:15 a.m., Diana Whitfield arrived at her office in downtown Crossing with a latte in her manicured hand and cruelty fresh in her heart. She had already planned 3 social humiliations for the week, women she would destroy through whispered lies and fabricated stories, minor executives she would fire publicly to remind everyone of her power. The FBI agents were waiting in her corner office when she arrived. There were 4 of them. 2 women, 2 men, all wearing dark windbreakers with golden letters stitched across the back. The lead agent, Sarah Chen, stepped forward with a folder thick as a dictionary. "Diana Whitfield, you are under arrest for wire fraud, racketeering, tax evasion, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Diana's latte hit the mahogany floor. The cup shattered. Coffee spread like blood across the expensive surface. "There's been a mistake," Diana whispered. "My lawyers, I'll call my lawyers." "Your lawyers are already aware," Sarah Chen said. "We notified them at dawn. Your company is being seized. Your assets are frozen. Every account, every property, every investment you believed was hidden, we have it all." What Diana did not know was that Alindro had not just called in favors with criminals. He had federal contacts too. People who owed him. People who wanted to owe him. His people had spent 72 hours digging through Diana's empire and found a network of financial crimes so extensive, so deliberate, that the evidence practically built the case itself. Embezzlement from her own company, $3.7 million. Falsified tax returns spanning 14 years. Illegal real estate schemes that displaced families and left communities destroyed. Wire fraud involving shell corporations in 6 different states. The evidence was airtight. Irrefutable. Delivered to the FBI anonymously, but delivered perfectly. Diana was handcuffed in front of her entire staff. The click of the handcuffs was audible across the quiet office. Phone started ringing immediately. Within minutes, Cameras flashed outside the building as she was walked down the sidewalk, her face contorted with shock and rage and the first tremors of understanding that her world had ended. Her face was on the evening news. Her face was on the morning news. Her face was on every news outlet from Boston to New York by midnight. Within 48 hours, the public knew everything. Diana Whitfield, the socialite who had terrorized women for sport, the woman who had orchestrated Sophia Hartley's eviction and financial ruin, would serve 40 years in federal prison. Not 35. Not 30. 40 years behind concrete walls with fluorescent lights and women who had nothing left to lose. Her reputation did not simply crumble. It was obliterated. Burned. Erased from memory as though she had never existed. Alejandro Valenti watched the news from his study while the morning light crept across the mahogany desk. He watched Diana's arrest replayed 3 times. He watched Douglas's apartment building cordoned off as though a crime had occurred there, though no one could explain what had happened. He watched the reporters struggle to explain how 2 people could vanish so completely in a single day. Sophia sat beside him on a leather chair that cost more than a year of her old rent. Her hair was clean. Her bruises were bandaged with careful attention. She wore clean clothes that fit properly for the first time in months. The swelling around her eye had receded to a faint yellow shadow. "It's over," Alejandro said quietly. Sophia stared at the television screen. Her hands trembled. "How did you?" she started. "You don't need to know how," he replied. "You just need to know you're safe. You're safe, Sophia. No one will ever hurt you again. That is my promise." Sophia closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she believed him. 14 months later, Sophia Hartley stood on a balcony overlooking Boston Harbor at sunset. The sky was burning orange and red and purple. The water reflected the light like liquid fire. She wore a simple blue dress that hung perfectly on her frame. Her hair had grown longer, falling past her shoulders in waves she had finally had time to care for. The penthouse was hers. Well, not hers exactly, but Alejandro had hired her as property manager of the entire building, a position that paid $87,000 per year. Her sister Grace sat in a hospital waiting room 3 months ago for the final checkup, and the doctor had used the word remission. The word had hung in the air like a prayer answered. The medical bills were paid in full. Every single one. And Sophia had saved $14,000 in a regular savings account in her own name. She was nobody's victim anymore. She heard footsteps behind her. Alejandro joined her at the railing, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city sprawled beneath them, lights beginning to glow as darkness fell. The wind carried the smell of salt water and distant rain. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. Sophia did not deny it. "You saved my life. You gave me everything. I didn't know how to. I didn't want you to think I expected something in return. That I was grateful because I had no choice. Sophia. And I'm afraid," she continued, turning to face him. "Because what if this ends? What if you realize that I'm still just a waitress, just a..." "Stop." His voice was soft but absolute. "For a year, I have carried something I need to say." Alejandro turned to face her fully. His dark eyes held the reflection of the sunset. The scar on his jaw was barely visible in the fading light. "That night in the diner, when I lifted your shirt and saw what they did to you, something changed in me. I have spent my entire life protecting my daughter from the world I grew up in. The violence. The brutality. The ways that people with power destroy people without it. But you," his voice roughened. "You survived that world with a kindness I have never possessed. You gave away coats to strangers when you were starving yourself. You protected my child when you had nothing. You worked double shifts and ate garbage and never once stopped being gentle. You are the strongest person I have ever met." Sophia's breath caught. "And I am in love with you," he said. "Not because I saved you, but because you were saving yourself long before I arrived. I love you because you are extraordinary, and the world tried to convince you that you were nothing. Sophia stepped closer. She took his scarred hand in both of hers, and the warmth of his palm against her skin felt like salvation. "You saw me at my lowest," she whispered. "When I was broken and bleeding and certain that nothing would ever be good again. You treated me like I was worth saving. You've been patient. You've been kind. You never demanded anything. You just loved me. How could I not love you?" They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon. The city lights blazed bright. The wind carried the sound of distant traffic and seagulls and the endless rhythm of a city that would never sleep. Two people who survived hell had found each other in the aftermath. The balcony door opened behind them. Emma ran out, her small frame silhouetted against the light from inside. She grabbed Sophia's leg. "Vivi, look! You can see all of Boston from here." Sophia knelt down and pulled the little girl close. Emma's hair smelled like strawberry shampoo and innocence. Alejandro placed his hand on both of them, and in that moment, they became something more than survivors. They became a family. If this story has moved your heart, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible and that kindness still exists in this world. Subscribe to our channel because tomorrow we have another story that will break your heart and put it back together with something stronger than it was before. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life.